Okay, everyone, good morning. This is John Haller from Fellowship Bible Chapel with our Israel update. This morning I have, excuse me one second here, got to shut off the audio here. I'm privileged to have with me Boaz Shapira from Alma Research in the north of Israel. Welcome and good morning, Boaz.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Boaz, why don't you just sort of start off a little bit and give us a little bit about what Alma Research, what you are engaged in, and the purpose of the organization.
Okay, so we're an NGO, an independent NGO. We don't affiliate with any government or military sources or think tanks or anything like that. We're completely independent. And our job is to focus and to show Israel's challenges on the northern border as part of trying to fight the delegitimization of Israel in the world and its actions. The way we work is solely on open sources. That means whatever's on the internet, we don't have any intelligence, army intelligence. We don't hack anywhere. We don't have sources that we operate, nothing. We just use open sources from the internet, Twitter, Telegram, Facebook, all these kind of things. And we just try to connect the dots and give this special perspective on what's going on Israel's borders. That means Lebanon, Syria. We deal a lot with Iran also, obviously, and all the militias and proxies she operates in the region.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your background, because I know you've served in the military, so sort of explain that to us.
Yeah, so in the military, I was in the paratroopers brigades, 3 years mandatory service. I served as a medic, as staff sergeant, and other kind. Let's do these two. And after I finished the army, I studied both bachelor's and MA in Middle Eastern studies. And that was pretty much my hobby for a while till I graduated. And after I started working in Alma Center, most of my focus is on the IRGC, on Iran, and the way it operates its proxies in the region.
Okay. I'm going to start off with my feed from Israel each day. As you can imagine, you live there, is filled with a lot of information, a lot of speculation and that type of thing about what's going to happen in the very near term. But I saw an article in Jerusalem Post this morning, and it was from Professor Uzi Rabi from the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies.
I was his student for almost a year.
Well, he said this, and I'm sure you can enlighten us on this. He said, you need to bring back the residents of the North, and for that, you need to prepare mentally and operationally for war. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think he's completely right. I think that Israel should be able to bring all the residents back. We're talking over 60,000. Some estimates reach all the way up to 80,000 people that have been evacuated for almost 10 months now. The question is, what do you do first and how do you do it? There are some voices in Israel, both from the political side of the map and both from residents of the northern communities, that simply say, bring the people back and that will fix half the problem. But the other side of this equation is, how do you keep them safe? How do you make them feel safe? Well, while Hezbollah is still literally on the border, we see them operate from the border almost on a daily basis or very close to the border. And we know that bringing them back with no ceasefire or without going to war means that there is only a matter of time before we have another massacre like October 7th. And on the other hand, if you want to ensure that they are safe, you're going to have to go to war and make Hezbollah pay significant prices.
So, after the Second Lebanon War, the UN enacted or adopted what we is known as Resolution 1701, which said that there would be no Hezbollah operations south of the Litani River in Lebanon.
Not only Hezbollah, any armed presence which is not Lebanese army or UNIFIL, the UN force.
Oh, so the UN forces weren't supposed to be in that area either.
No, they were supposed. They're the two armed forces, only Lebanese army and UN forces. Other than that, no Hezbollah, no Hamas, no Amal, no other armed presence south of the Litani River.
Let me ask you this. So I think I saw an interview with Sarit recently in which she said that the Hezbollah plan for Israel was essentially what Hamas did in Gaza back on October 7th. Can you sort of build on that a little bit?
It's not kind of the same plan. It's the same plan. Hezbollah even released a video, an official release meant for Israelis to see, where he elaborates on his program, and it looks pretty much the same. It starts with a barrage of rockets throughout the border. From there, it goes to invasion. They talk about 5,000 combatants invading Israel in multiple fronts, taking over. They're not talking about military bases. They're not talking about military targets. They're talking solely about cities, communities, and civilian infrastructure. So it's pretty much the same. We know Hezbollah and Hamas have very close ties, and they transfer knowledge and weapons and stuff like that. We can also see it in the tunnel. I guess we'll talk about it later. But all the tunnels that we see in Lebanon, same knowledge, same know-how, same technologies, are in Gaza. And the IDF is dealing with it on a daily basis for the past 10 months, trying to destroy these tunnels.
How does the terrain, and I've been down to the Gaza border, I've been to the Lebanon border, explain how the terrain in Gaza is different than the terrain in Lebanon?
Well, terrain in Gaza is mostly sandy because it's close to the beach, obviously. It's very flat, and it's very easy to dig. You can dig with your hands, basically, if you have to. So they have a very extensive network of tunnels there throughout the Gaza Strip. So theoretically, you can get into a tunnel in Erez Crossing in northern Gaza and go out the other side in Rafah. In Lebanon, it's a bit more different. It's much more mountainous. You have a lot more, most of the country is rock, at least in the border areas. And it looks a lot different, a lot harder to dig. So Hezbollah had to use special machinery. It took them much longer. But in the same, they got much more assistance from Iran and North Korea. And companies in North Korea, we saw even contracts of them digging tunnels in Lebanon, involving very big machinery.
So in the I know that at least from the sources that I can review, open source, similar to what you review, the tunnel network in Gaza proved to be much, much more extensive than anyone had anticipated. Is there any similar review that's been done or anticipation as to what evaluation of the extent of the tunnel network that Hezbollah has constructed in southern Lebanon?
Well, actually, we released a report, I think 2 years back, talking about Hezbollah tunnel land, we call it, I think. And we identified basically 5 different kind of tunnels. Now, again, Lebanon is much bigger than Gaza. It's a different kind of terrain, and you're going to have to invest much more to dig these tunnels. They're going to have to be much deeper, much longer. So Hezbollah has, first of all, the border crossing tunnels, which Israel identified and sealed 6 of them in 2018 in Northern Shield operation. We have approach tunnels, which are meant to carry terrorists all the way up to the border, and from there they come up from underground and blow up the wall, the fence, and with the surprise effect. You have the local tunnels within villages, within towns, much like we see today in Gaza, which connect between buildings, between areas. And you also have strategic tunnels that go, for instance, all the way from South Lebanon to the Bekaa region, from Syria into Lebanon, and from different regions. So they can go for tens of kilometers or dozens of miles. and you can fit a full truck loaded with missiles inside. So you have launching shafts, and you have command centers and intelligence centers, and to that extent, it's much more sophisticated and much bigger than what we see in Gaza.
So, what kind of? I guess I'm not sure which direction to go. Tell us a little bit about how, since October 7th, I know you live in the Golan. How has life changed in the north of Israel since October 7th?
Life in Israel has changed a lot since October 7th. I can tell you specifically in the Golan Heights and in the northern parts of Israel, we're much more alert. Things we've seen in Gaza, in the southern border, we know that are still a possibility in both the Lebanese border and in Syrian border. That means that the same terrorist organizations and the same amount of combatants in the Lebanese border exist also in Syria. So, for instance, since October 7th, our first responders team, we have in every community, we have a crew of about, used to be 10, after the war it grew up to 30 people. That's what they do now. They don't work. They only keep the community safe, and they're basically soldiers now. Second of all, you can see a lot of businesses that are being shut down, closed, because there's no tourism, no people are coming here. The border with Lebanon, you have, again, about 60,000 people evacuated. So a lot of businesses are not working. There's no school, there's no nothing. So you can definitely feel the war, even if you are not evacuated. And it's a very big damage that's been done to these communities, especially the ones that have been evacuated. And a lot of people, I think they say somewhere around 13 to 15% are saying they're not coming back no matter what after this war. And these are communities that have struggled to bring new families in the first place, even before the war, because it's a rural area. You don't have all the facilities, all the opportunities you get in the center of Israel, like in Haifa and Tel Aviv. And now you have this war, which damaged these communities even more. So it changed a lot during the past few months. And in the Golan Heights specifically, at the beginning of the war, we weren't a part of the war, if you will, because the Hezbollah hasn't shot at us, and there was almost no alarms, and we were not evacuated. But in the past, I think 2 to 3 months, we can see them aiming at the Golan Heights much more. We've had only in the past month, we had about 14 or 15 people getting killed. Last Saturday, we had 12 kids in Majdal Shams from Hezbollah rockets. A day later, we had another civilian killed in one of the kibbutzim. And 2 weeks before, we had 2 parents getting killed from a rocket attack hitting their vehicle when they were driving home.
So you've had, if I understand the statistics correctly, since October 7th, over 30 civilians have now been killed in northern Israel.
Something along these lines, yeah.
Rocket attacks. And there have also been roughly the same number of IDF casualties, if I understand that correctly as well.
I think it's even less than that.
Oh, it's less. Okay.
I think around 20. So that means you have more civilian casualties than soldiers, and that's from an organization stating that he only hits military targets.
But you lived up there for a while. You served in the IDF, and I guess my question is, and I don't want to get you into a political area, and if you don't want to answer any question, by the way, you just say, I'd rather not answer that question. But it seems to me that, 30 civilian deaths, if we go back to the experience of the Second Lebanon War in 2006, I'm not sure what the number of civilian deaths were or IDF casualties were in that particular war, but it seems that I'm not sure why 30 civilians, 20 IDF, why it's not eliciting a bigger response from Israel. Is there an explanation for that?
Me personally, I don't have a good explanation for that. You'd have to ask my government, I guess. I wish we'd see a much stronger response for all these incidents. But on the other hand, I can tell you that for the first few months, when the IDF was focusing on Gaza, maybe up until the end of the Rafah operation, the main focus again was on Gaza. So you don't want to escalate what's going on in Lebanon, especially when for most of the time you can see Hezbollah was shooting mostly into the 0 to 5 kilometers communities or areas of the border. So they haven't really been out of this range, except for a few incidents where we eliminated high officials there or targeted places in the Bekaa, which are a bit farther from the border, so they responded. Usually when they got further from the border, it's as a response. So I think for the Israeli government, it was kind of convenient to keep it that way. We shoot to the 0 to 5 kilometers, they retaliate. But in the past few months, as I said, we can see them shooting for non-evacuated areas and communities and targeting them specifically. I mean, it's not a coincidence or a retaliation. And in the same time, we see that their retaliation are getting much stronger and they're getting much fiercer. So, for instance, if at the beginning of the war, when we took out Salah el-Aruri in Beirut, I think it was January, their response was shooting a barrage of rockets to the Miron military base in Miron region. And that was considered like a strong retaliation. Now they're shooting at Miron almost on a weekly basis. So it's, and their retaliation reached all the way to Tveria in the southern parts of the Golan Heights. And now they're talking about Haifa and Tel Aviv as a retaliation to the attack in Beirut. So I think we can see an escalation coming. And I think the Israeli government also understood this and they started to retaliate or take more severe actions against these retaliations. Again, I wish it would have happened sooner, but maybe we didn't have all the sources we need for such an action.
So in that, back in February, the Tehran Times and other newspapers in Iran, which I, by the way, I do read on a fairly regular basis, there was a picture that was posted of a poster, a large poster, very large poster in Palestinian Square in Tehran. And in that poster, there were rockets with writing in Hebrew that said, are you ready for 2 million displaced, that I'm paraphrasing it, are you ready for 2,000 displaced persons in the north? Now, since that time, have you seen any change in tactics of Hezbollah or the Iranian-backed militias within Lebanon? By the way, there are Hamas factions in southern Lebanon as well, are there not?
There are Hamas factions. There are other Hamas-affiliated factions like Jamaat al-Islamiyah. There's Amal, which is Shiite and operates with close coordination with Hezbollah. And yeah, so there are more factions than just Hezbollah, but they are all under Hezbollah guidance.
Okay, and Hezbollah itself is under whose guidance and control?
They pretty much operate on their own guidance, but on a tactical level, but they're definitely under Iranian instructions and under Iranian control. And we can see that now when they're trying to coordinate the retaliation to the Beirut and Tehran attacks, and they are probably going to be coordinated, and their severity is going to vary depending on what Iran decides.
And tell us a little bit about, I've seen some interviews with you about how the IRGC is funded, organized in its relationship to the central Iranian government. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. To what level do you want us to, how detailed?
Well, just drill down as much as you want. We'll take
okay,
the time.
So the IRGC started, if we go way back, the IRGC started just a short while after the Islamic Revolution in 79. Was supposed to be kind of a Praetorian Guard for Khomeini. So for one goal was to protect the regime, make it safe, and the other one was to expand the revolution, export it as they call it, first into Iran, make sure you have the Shiite kind of regime they wanted, and then from there to the rest of the Middle East, the world, etc. What started as a small organization throughout the years is now pretty much an army. So Iran operates with two armies. It has its official army, the Artesh, and it has IRGC. IRGC has an air force, a navy, ground forces, pretty much like every other army, and it has the Quds force. This kind of system grew and grew, and today you see IRGC former members almost in every branch of the Iranian regime, in every branch of civil society, of the judicial system, banking and economic system, everywhere. They've entrenched themselves in every system, and they pretty much control Iran today. Now, it's much more than just a military force. It's a whole system that provides for the population, but in the same time, it has its own internal political and even more economical system. IRGC has a holding company called Khatam al-Anbiya, which is estimated at about $250 billion. It has over 800 companies under its name, a bunch more of front shell companies, and that's how they do business. That's how they get their parts for their weapons. That's how they move people across the globe. That's how they get money. Okay. Other than that, they get funded by the Iranian regime, which is very wealthy. It just doesn't use the money it has towards its population, but to export the revolution and to support other forces. So, although it seems like Iran is under sanctions and people that are very poor, I think there's about 50% poverty rate. $1 is equivalent to 600,000 Iranian rial. A lot of people doesn't have running water and electricity in some parts of the country, but still the regime itself is very rich, and the IRGC is even richer because they have their own apparatus and they know how to handle themselves through sanctions, much like Hezbollah, which obviously has very close connections to IRGC. They work closely together. And Hezbollah, for instance, is one of, if not the largest drug trafficking organization in the world. They deal with stolen car parts. They deal with arms. So these are all very wealthy organizations. And we have to remember that when we're talking about trying to cripple the economy and stuff like that, we need to remember that, first of all, the Iranian regime will always use the money for its own goals and not for the population. So you'll only hit the population, the civilians, and that they already have a full running apparatus to go over these sanctions. They're not even touching the wing for them.
So, I mean, I've read that Khamenei, for example, his organization, and while he may live a fairly austere life, I don't know that, that's just what I've read, that he may control a fortune of somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion. Is that consistent with what you understand?
I don't know about the exact numbers, but yeah, it's completely consistent. It's not just special to Khamenei or to Iran. Even Haniyeh and Mashal, the leaders of Hamas, they're estimated at a few $1 billion each of them. So you can understand where the money is coming from, right? And where it's not going. So It's something we see all across the board with all these players. I'm sure Hassan Nasrallah is not hungry right now in the bunker.
Right. So, he doesn't make many public appearances, does he?
No. All of his public appearances were on video recordings or streamings. He hasn't been seen publicly since 2006, I think, or something along these lines.
So so let's go back a little bit to what I was starting to talk about. Was since October 7th, have the tactics of Hezbollah changed in any way from your observation?
I think the tactics have changed in accordance to how the IDF retaliates to Hezbollah's activities. So if at the beginning, in the first 2 months, we saw a lot of Hezbollah attacks using anti-tank missiles, guided missiles, like the Cornet or Almas, the Iranian Almas. The way the IDF responded to that made them change the way they worked. And then we saw a decrease in the use of anti-tank missiles and then a climb in the use of UAVs, because at the beginning, actually up until the past 2 months, Israel had a very big problem dealing with these UAVs, identifying them and intercepting them. And in the past 2 months, we see an increase in the ability of the IDF to intercept. So now we see much more use of rocket fire, different rockets, different kind of attacks. Now they try tactics of first launching UAVs, and then trying to see where the Iron Dome batteries are, and then launching the rockets. Or it can work on the other way of launching rockets, exhausting the Iron Dome batteries, and then using UAVs against specific targets because you don't have launchers. So they vary, they change, they learn us, they understand where our weaknesses are, and they use it. I'm sure there are still weapons that we haven't seen. And again, not a lot, all of these weapons originate from Iran, whether it's being delivered directly or being assembled within Lebanon. But all of these weapons, starting from rifles, from sniper rifles, all the way down to missiles, all come directly from Iran, either through the land corridor going from Iran to Iraq through Syria into Lebanon, or through other corridors like Haniyeh airlines, or commercial shipping lines coming from Iran via the Mediterranean. But Iran keeps on funding and supplying Hezbollah throughout the war with newer and newer weapons. And for instance, at the beginning of the war, we saw only Cornet attacks. If we're talking about anti-tank missiles, Cornet attacks, we know them, we know this missile, we know it very well, but all of a sudden we saw a new missile, which is called Almas. It's an Iranian variant of the Israeli Spike. And that was a new weapon. And now we see the 4th generation of the Almas, which has a greater range. It doesn't have the fiber optics anymore. It's much more advanced. And we see how Iran keeps on supplying Hezbollah throughout the war, depending on how they want to change their tactics.
And so, I mean, since October 7th, how many rockets, missiles, anti-tank mortars, whatever, have been launched by Hezbollah against Israel?
Well, it's kind of hard to count warheads or projectiles because you don't always know how many were shot at a single attack, but we can definitely count attacks. And so far, we've recorded over 2,500 attacks carried out by Hezbollah and other factions. Now, an attack can be a single UAV or a single rocket, but it can also be a barrage of 200-300 rockets, like we've seen in some retaliations. In total, we have about, it's an average of 250 attacks per month, and it sums up to about 9 or 10 a day, depends on the month. So we can roughly say we've seen way over 10,000 projectiles or warheads being shot at Israel from Lebanon in the past 10 months.
I put up shared a screen of Alma's homepage. And by the way, if you want to support the work of Alma, you can go to israel-alma.org. And if you do a look or a search for Boaz Shapira, you'll find that he's been very busy over the past few months writing a lot of articles about drones and missiles and the change in tactics, some of the things that he just talked about. There are plenty of articles there that you can get that. So let's focus a little bit on what your former professor said about we need to do something. We have to do something to get rid of this threat in the north. And I don't know if the best way to talk about it is, a year ago, Israel would have had sort of what we would call an order. I think Zareed Zahavi's talked about this as well, your director. about an order of battle, about how we deal with the threat from Hezbollah, and then bring that forward to today and tell us how that has changed given the changing tactics of Hezbollah and Iran.
I think I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question right away, but I think Israel has no military problem defeating Hezbollah to the extent of pushing him to whatever limit or whatever border, whatever line Israel would want. If Israel would decide that now the main objective is go to Beirut, we would be in Beirut. I have no doubt about it. What price, what cost, how the world's going to retaliate, how other countries is going to retaliate, how many casualties is Israel going to have, I don't know. I know we can do it. It's not a problem. I think the main question we should ask is, and again, there's no question Israel should do something, and this situation, or the situation even before that, even before October 7th, Israel cannot have this kind of threats of this anywhere between 50 to 100,000 terrorists just waiting to go into Israel. And we estimated before October 7th that a war with Hezbollah is inevitable in the range of the next 2 months. So we estimated up until November that Hezbollah is ready, Hezbollah is interested in war, and that's what is going to happen. Now, so again, going from this point of Israel has no military problem to do whatever it wants, I think the main question we should ask is, what does Israel want? Okay, so we got to Beirut, we got to the Bekaa region, and we destroyed most of Hezbollah's capabilities. Now what? How do you end this war? What is the mechanism that makes sure you don't go back to 1701? Just to remind you, Israel signed 1701, the resolution that ended the Second Lebanon War, and maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, there was Hezbollah operatives right back on the border. And the UN forces up until today cannot do much. They're pretty much banned from going into villages, into most of the areas in South Lebanon, and they can move in the main towns, main roads, and cities. That's it. Hezbollah won't let them, and whenever they try to go anywhere else, they get either shot or blocked or whatever. And we've seen UN soldiers getting killed in South Lebanon in the past year. So the question is, what does Israel want to do? How does it want to end the war? And what kind of mechanism is going to make sure that once you end the war, it's not going to happen again? And you're going to prevent Hezbollah from building its power in South Lebanon again. Because I have no doubt Hezbollah is going to stay in Lebanon. It's much broader than just a terrorist organization. It's a whole system. They have the same systems the Lebanese country have. So you're not going to destroy it. You're not going to dismantle it. Yes, you are going to hurt it very bad. You're going to hurt the Lebanese state very bad. But we have to make sure it never happens again. We don't have a fourth Lebanon war. Now, looking at what happens with Gaza, which is much easier to that extent that Hamas is a small organization. It's not Iranian-backed as much as Lebanon and Hezbollah, and it doesn't have the connections once Israel holds the borders, and no one is willing to go into Gaza. So Lebanon is going to be much more complicated to achieve this goal. And I think that question doesn't get enough attention for right now, and I guess we'll have to deal with it at the end of the war, maybe, which is too late.
Yeah, explain that just a little bit more. I mean, what do you mean exactly by that? I'm not sure I'm following exactly.
And so again, Israel has no military problem defeating Hezbollah. The main question is, what happens the day after? How do you make sure that Hezbollah is not coming back to the border a week later? How do you make sure it doesn't rebuild its power 2 years later? How do you make sure it's not a threat for Israel anymore? For that, you have, to the best of my understanding, two options. Either Israel is going to hold another part of Lebanese countries like we had from 82 to 2000, which didn't end very well for us, or you're going to have an international force working there, which right now it isn't working very well, as we can see. UNIFIL is not effective in any way. So that's a question that I think is pointed not only to Israel, but to the international community, and especially to Europe and in the US, which are the ones who are going to have to lead this solution of making sure Hezbollah is no longer a threat to Israel and to Lebanon to the same extent, because Hezbollah is destroying Lebanon also.
So, to get people to come back home, we've talked about the Litani River. The Litani River is located. What is it? Well, it varies in distance from the Israeli border. I think near Metula, it might only be 5 or 6 kilometers away from. What's that?
I think it's even less near Metula, but yeah, it varies from a few kilometers. I think up to 10 or 12. I'm not sure it's a solution, because we know that Hezbollah rockets, even the simplest ones, can reach way over 10, 20 kilometers. Even Katyusha and Grad rockets, which are basically barrels with explosives. We know the Radwan unit, their special forces that are designed and trained to go invade Israel, driving 5 kilometers from the Litani River to the border is how much? 5 minutes drive? So I'm not sure it's a solution, because the threat will still be there, only 2 minutes more in driving along the road. So that's what I was trying to answer before, saying that we should have a mechanism making sure not only it's not near the border, but it's not rebuilding its forces again and its power.
So also explain a little bit to us about, we talked about Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Hezbollah is also present in Syria. And what's the Iranian funded militia threat in the Syrian region up along the Golan Heights?
I think it's pretty much the same threat. We have not only Hezbollah, I think we can count more than 6 different militias working within Syria. Most of them are right now concentrated in eastern Syria, next to the Iraqi border. They have a very big presence, though, in Damascus and Aleppo and in Dara region in southern Syria. But it's no problem making a decision and taking all these soldiers or terrorists, which are estimated tens of thousands, and moving them to the Golan Heights. They have the same weaponry, they have the same training, they have the same combat experience from the Syrian civil war, much like Hezbollah. And I think to an extent it's even a bigger threat than Hezbollah in Lebanon, because I don't think Israel pays much attention to these militias and the threat they pose to the communities of the Golan Heights. And we released an article about 2 or 3 weeks ago saying exactly this, that next war, it's not only Hezbollah, we should anticipate a ground invasion coming from Syria, as well as missile and rocket barrages and UAVs coming from these militias. So Iran basically built the same infrastructure they have in Lebanon in Syria. And they also use the same mechanism of using civilian infrastructure to entrench and build the military infrastructure. So it's pretty much the same deal.
So what, I know this is sort of speculation and stuff. And we're sort of sitting here, everybody's seeing all the things flying around about Khamenei threatening revenge for the recent strikes. Well, let me ask you about that first. There have been a number of what I would call decapitation strikes, I guess, of Iranian IRGC and Hezbollah and other. Well, there was IRGC people taken out in Damascus on April the 1st. That led to the Iranian drone and missile barrage of, I think, April 13th.
Yeah.
Which was not effective. It just sent a message, and it may have been an intelligence gathering thing on the part of the Iranians. But I guess my question is, why go after the leadership in the way that's been done, and what impact does it have on Hezbollah tactics and what Hezbollah is and the IRGC is doing?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it's more than. First of all, you're sending a message when you're taking out this kind of of people. You're sending a message saying, I know who you are, I know where you are, I can reach you wherever you are, and I'm willing to take the risks of doing so. Operationally, is that a big factor? Both the IRGC and Hezbollah are not small organizations. If you remember when Israel took out Fathi Shkaki in Malta, the leader of the PIJ, a few decades back, it crippled the organization for over a decade. That's not the case with Hezbollah and the IRGC. These are armies. They have a chain of command. They have a lot of experienced commanders and leaders. And we've seen in Lebanon, when you take out the leader of the Nasser unit or the Aziz unit, which are very big, very important units, Hezbollah hasn't stopped shooting. It hasn't lowered its rate of fire. It hasn't touched it, much to our disappointment. If anyone had any anticipation, it would. But the other option is even worse, of not doing so. So I think to that extent, it's a part of the war. You need to take out their leadership. And I think the last attack in Beirut did a pretty good job at achieving these goals of sending a message. And both, I think Shukr is more crucial than other commanders because of his experience and his posture and stature within Hezbollah. But again, it's not going to stop him. Not going to stop not Hezbollah, not the IRGC. It's not. We see it also in Yemen. It's not deterring them from keeping on attacking us. It's ideology. You do not negotiate with ideology. You need to kill it.
So, in respect of, for example, the attack on Haniyeh in Tehran was a stunning attack. I mean, at least I don't know whether this is accurate or not. The New York Times reported yesterday that he wasn't taken out by an air-launched missile. He was taken out by a bomb that had been planted.
So far, I've seen theories talking about missile being shot from either Iraq or Azerbaijan, anti-tank missile being shot from a close-by building, either within Tehran or from outside of Tehran, a UAV, FPV drone, and a cruise missile coming from a submarine. Now we have the New York Times saying it was an explosive device from within the apartment.
Yeah, I've also seen.
I don't know.
I've also seen that Khomeini took him out because he.
Yeah. Was, we have this also that it's an Iranian job. Yeah.
So it's theories about what happened are sort of like noses and ears. Everybody has a few of them. Individually. So let's sort of look at the near term with what might happen based on your knowledge. What might we expect over it? Let's assume Israel decides to do something. How are they going to go about it? And by the way, I watched, which a lot of think tanks and intelligence reports. And actually, I'm going to go down a rabbit trail because I want to ask you about this. I saw an interview with Miri Eisen, a couple of interviews with her and others. She's director of the Institute for Counterterrorism at Replenishment University. But she had said that when the war starts, that Israel would expect 200 or more casualties, deaths per day for a period of time. She would not specify that. Since the north has been evacuated along the border, I mean, Nahariya is not. Nahariya seems to still be intact for quite a bit. Would that casualty estimate have changed in the meantime? Because the people aren't there like they were.
I have to tell you the truth. I haven't seen too many Israeli estimates on cazalties. I've seen a few. Miri is very knowledgeable. If she says so, I guess she's seen some of these evaluations. But as far as the north goes, I don't think it's the main factor. Both Iran and Hezbollah are able to reach any point in Israel. And when you shoot a barrage of hundreds of rockets towards Tel Aviv or the center of Israel, it's not certain that everything is going to be intercepted. Actually, it's almost certain that not everything is going to be intercepted. Having said that, I don't know how long this casualty rate is going to happen, because 200 a day is pretty high from what I know, but I'm not up to date. From the ones I've seen talk about anywhere around 800 to 1,000 throughout the war, civilian casualties, not military casualties. And we have to remember Israel has both Iron Dome, David Sling, and arrow systems, but we also have shelters, as simple as that people know very well how to stay in shelters for days on. And it's going to be a whole new experience, no doubt, but I'm not sure we're talking about 200 casualties a day for like the whole war. It's going to be a few days. And it depends on a lot on how Israel is going to retaliate. Because for instance, Hezbollah rate of fire is estimated to be somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 rockets on Israel for the first few days, let's say for the first 10 to 12 days. And from there, it's going to decrease because the IDF is going to hit a lot of them. Some of them are going to be intercepted. Some of them are going to fall in open areas or within Lebanon. So it's going to be hard for them to keep that rate of fire. Same goes for Iran. Launching massive barrage from Iran to Israel is no easy task. You can see it takes time. Last time in April, it took over 10 days. Now it's taking, I think, 4 or 5 days already till we see something. And keeping that working when Israel is trying to target you, it's no easy task. So yes, Israel is going to have casualties, no doubt, nothing we've seen before. But I think that the other side is going to see much more damage.
So when Hamas in Gaza launches rockets, there are estimates of 20-30% of them never leaving Gaza. Is there any estimate that you can make on like how many Hezbollah rockets that are fired that don't make it out of Lebanon or Syria? Well, maybe I should ask you a question. Does Hezbollah really fire rockets at Israel from Syria at this time?
So far, we haven't seen much fire from Syria. It was very sporadically. Most of the time, it wasn't a Hezbollah operation. It was a Hamas or other militia groups. Most of the fire we get in the Golan Heights coming from either Lebanon or Iraq, or as we call it in the IDF statements, from the east. But most of the time, it's not Hezbollah from Syria. As to the expected failure rate, I think we released a short statement saying that Hezbollah has about the same number of failures that either explode on launch or landing within Lebanon. But we've seen a much higher rate in the Iranian attack in April, where an estimate of even 40 up to 50% hasn't even reached Israel or being intercepted by Israel and its allies. Later on, some speculated they used all the rockets and all the high-tech technology, just like you said, maybe as an intelligence operation. I'm not sure I'm entirely convinced. We see the same ratio in other attacks, like the attacks on ISIS or attacks on U.S. bases. Not all projectiles, not all missiles and UAVs reach their target after launch.
So somebody asked a question in the chat here on our live stream about of course you have to layer on top of everything from we Americans here as we're going through this rather difficult political process, which is you're no stranger to that in Israel.
Welcome to Israel.
Yeah.
Welcome to our life the past decade.
I think I said recently that the way American politics is going, I wish I could be in the relative calm of Israeli politics by comparison, because it's just it's insane.
I don't think it's better. We're just used to.
Yeah, you're used to having elections. I think I was there a year and a half. I was
maybe 5 during a year.
Yeah, I was down at the Knesset in December 2022. It was after the election of November, the last election in Israel, and they were still. It was amazing to watch the fighting and negotiating and everything going on in that building.
No, it's hectic. It's hectic.
It was insane. But in recent times, the United States has withdrawn from Afghanistan. And when we withdrew from Afghanistan, we left a lot of equipment behind. Do you know if any of that equipment has made its way into the hands of the IRGC or the Iranian government or Hezbollah?
I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't seen any evidence. Like you, I guess everyone saw that the Taliban forces are dressed like Delta Force right now from all the equipment the US left there. I wouldn't be surprised. Iran really likes to do reverse engineering on Western weapons. So if it could have put her hands on some Humvees, some helicopters, rifles, whatever was left behind, I'm sure they would, because they have certain influence within Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they have their own supporters there. So yes, I can definitely see a situation where it happened. Again, I haven't seen proof.
So, so your assessment is Israel ultimately prevails in this situation. Let me ask you this: there are the estimates as to the number of rockets, missiles, projectiles that Hezbollah has under its control. I've seen the number 150,000, 250,000. Then I think there was some Iranian propaganda that there's a million potential things. But let's go with the 150,000 number, and they've launched 7,000 since October 7th. Does that mean that they've gone from 150,000 down to 143,000,
No.
or are they getting resupplied?
They're getting replenished. They're getting resupplied. Some of the rockets and missiles they produce within Lebanon and UAVs. For example, the Burkan rockets, which are barrel bombed, we've seen in Syria. Hezbollah now massively produces them by itself. It's 0.5 ton of explosives. And we even found evidence of Alma missiles being produced in 2023 in Iran, being launched at Israel in early 2024. So they're being replenished throughout. And in Alma, we estimate 250,000 warheads. I think it's an underestimation now that we see the numbers. But we have to remember a lot of them are very close range, such as mortars and munition going maybe 10 kilometers. But still, we have precision-guided missiles that can reach any point in Israel, highly, highly precise, to like 3 meters CEP, which is very precise.
So you mentioned barrel bombs and 0.5 ton of explosives. And those are, well, I believe that the rocket that hit Majdal Shams a week ago and killed 12 or 14 people, that was about 100 pounds of explosives.
Yeah, that was a Falak rocket, an Iranian-produced Falak rocket. The evidence the IDF found to support that the notion that it was Hezbollah, you can even see the same writing on the rocket. And yeah, it's a Falak 240 millimeter rocket produced by Iran, delivered to Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is pretty much the only actor in this region that has it. Hamas doesn't have it as far as we know, and other parties hasn't used it yet. So it was definitely Hezbollah, and it's definitely an Iranian rocket. They also have Falak 2, which is a larger rocket, and Hezbollah claims it's laser guided, so it's practically a precision guided weapon.
So when you talk about the barrel bombs, you're essentially talking about something that's 10 times the size of what landed on Majdal Shams.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And how would Hezbollah and the Iranian militias, how would they deliver that to Israel? Would that be by a missile?
No, they're using it a couple times a week. They're shooting it right now. They're shooting it on military bases, but it's not unguided. It has a range of about 10 kilometers. So sometimes they shoot it at military base and it hits, 0.5 mile or 2 mile away, and they hit a community like Shlomi. It already happened. The Falak rocket also is not guided. They were aiming at a base on Hermon Mountain about 2 miles from there, and they hit Majdal Shams. So we know these missiles or rockets are very powerful, but they're not accurate.
So I want to make sure I understand that. You're saying that the missile that landed on Majdal Shams a week ago was actually being shot towards Mount Meron?
Mount Hermon.
Oh, Mount Hermon. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They released a statement saying we targeted this and this base on Mount Hermon using this and this rocket. They stated a Falak rocket, one Falak rocket, and that's the same Falak rocket that fell in Majdal Shams.
Okay. So let me a question that comes up often when we're talking to people in Israel, and there are a lot of people that follow this channel that are big supporters of Israel. What's the best way for Americans that want to help to help in terms of support? Where do we go to direct our funds and money in the right way, the most effective way?
First of all, I think what Israel needs the most is both international support and legitimacy to do what it has to do, because there is this notion I've heard, I think, from more than one American, and the basic question, it varies in phrasing, but why is Israel always fighting? Why are you fighting Lebanon? Why are you fighting Iran? Why? And we need to understand it works the other way around. Israel needs support because Israel doesn't want to take over Gaza. It's unbelievable, but even Bibi said we're not going to resettle Gaza. Israel doesn't want to retake Lebanon, and we don't want to retake Syria, but we face severe threats from these places and from Iran, and we need the ability to defend ourselves. And as we saw in the Rafah or in Gaza in general, there's a lot of forces trying to stop Israel from protecting itself, although it looks very bad when civilians are killed. But that's the price of fighting urban places where military infrastructure is embedded within civilian infrastructure. So we need a lot of support, both internationally and from the US. I know there's been a lot of talk about ammunitions that are being delayed that Israel needs, and in context of Rafah or either Lebanon. So Israel definitely needs it. Israel needs support in the future after this war, because it's not going to end tomorrow. It's a marathon. I think we're going to see the operation in Gaza for the next at least 2 years, if not more. And same for Lebanon. It's not going to end tomorrow. Iran is poised, is determined on destroying Israel. And it's important we understand that they mean business. They're serious. And if you want to direct your attention, your funds, your efforts, I think they should go there to try and support Israel and its legitimacy to act as much as possible, because as you can see, no one's going to help us with boots on the ground. There's been tremendous help from the US and England and Germany and other countries throughout the war, but no one came to fight instead of us. When I went to Gaza for 4 months, there was no other soldier coming to replace me from another country. So we're going to do this job, but we need your help.
So, and of course, you can always support the research that Alma engages.
Also, yeah, thank you.
I knew you were too humble to say that. So there's a lot of talk, and we'll wrap this up here pretty quickly, but I so appreciate your time this morning or this afternoon in your case. But there's a lot of talk in Gaza about the day after. What does the day after look like? What does the day after look like? And my contention has been maybe we need to talk more about what do you do on the day before? And I think you're sort of at a day before in the north. But what would the day after, what would be a great goal for the day after to get the situation resolved in Lebanon and along the northern border? What would that look like, do you think? And I know that's speculation on your part, and I
that's
understand
speculation. That. It's way above my pay grade, but for me, is me being able to raise my kids a mile from the Syrian border or a mile from the Lebanese border and not having to fear of what's on the other side. Having said that, it doesn't mean necessarily a military solution in Gaza. I don't think Israel should stay there or in Lebanon. I would like to see the international community coming in and trying to rebuild this place, because the damage there, especially in Gaza, is biblical. Is nothing like we've ever seen in any war, I think, before. But it's totally necessary, because the amount of weapons and tunnels and explosives that are being hid within these houses and under these houses is amazing. So again, we're going to have to see a lot of international support, because Israel is not able to do it alone, and it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of efforts to make sure. Because again, it's not only military action. We're going to have to make sure that the kids that are being brought up in Lebanon and in Gaza are not taught to hate what's going on the other side. And we've seen this change happen in the Gulf countries, in the Emirates and in Saudi Arabia, where the anti-Semitism and the hatred towards Israel is almost out of the textbooks in schools. And I think we're going to see a similar effort, or need to see a similar effort, in Gaza and in Lebanon. But that's a supportive action after the military act that's going to have to be first, because Hezbollah is not voluntarily going to leave power in Lebanon.
So, and I guess your estimate as to how long any military operation might take place in Lebanon, how long that will last?
Again, it's speculation. I would hazard a guess of a month or two, at least. Not much more, but something along the lines of a month or two, because you're going to have to do a lot of work in the borders, that in the communities close to the border in Lebanon.
I think I saw an interview with Sarit, or maybe it was Avraham, who told me that Hezbollah in southern Lebanon is embedded in about almost every other home or building. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yes. The estimates vary between 30% in civilian houses to 50%, and in other buildings, public buildings, it's even more.
So they would use those as like a tunnel entrance or exit, and
launch pad, intelligence command, whatever. Same things we see in Gaza. The prototype came from Lebanon.
Tell us just briefly, what's the border fence like there along the Lebanon border? I mean, it's a fence, right?
It used to be a rusty old fence up until October 7th, or just before that. And Israel started building a wall. It's not as big as the Gazan wall, but it's pretty close. It's aimed at stopping, or at least delaying Hezbollah. It's not going to stop them. They already released videos showing how they're breaching this wall. But the aim is to wall this whole fence up wherever we can. And we have to remember there's a lot of places in Mount Hermon, Har Dov, close to where I live, where there's no fence, because the border is not marked between Syria and Lebanon and Israel. So there's no fence. For instance, from Majdal Shams, east, north and east, there's no fence. Not between Syria, not between Lebanon.
So there's been a lot of talk. We have our diplomats, the American diplomats, of course, are running around acting like they have the solution. And some of us on the other side of the political spectrum are very skeptical of these people. They seem to be the current administration seems to be very pro-Iranian in everything that they do. But one of there's an American diplomat named Amos Hochstein who runs around Lebanon. He was the one who negotiated the maritime border deal with Lebanon at the end of the Lapid administration, Lapid government in Israel. And he's been running around talking about all of these different dispute areas along the border of Lebanon and Israel. And I think I've seen like there are 12 or 13 of those.
It's between 13 and 14, depends on how you count. Yeah.
Okay. One of those is a place called Shebaa Farms. And when it's called Shebaa Farms, we have this idea that it's this a farm or a couple of farms. And tell us what Shebaa Farms is, and what it looks like, and whether it's strategically valuable. That
Well, Shebaa Farms is a piece of land. It's actually a mountain. It's a whole mountain range. From the Golan Heights or from the Hermon Mountain all the way down to Hula Valley. In Israel, we call it Har Dov, this area, and it overlooks all of northern Israel. So basically, on a good day, if you're standing on top of these areas, you can see almost to Haifa. You can see Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee, and controls all of northern Israel and a lot of parts of the Golan. So it's very, very strategic. The reason it's under dispute is because that during the French and British mandate over the Middle East, the French and England demarcated the borderline between them very clearly. But Shebaa Farm was in between Syria and Lebanon, and the French never bothered marking the line there. So when Israel took over the Golan Heights in 1967, we took over these parts also. And there's a dispute whether this area belongs to Lebanon or to Syria. There's also a small village just at the beginning of these mountains that's called Rajab. It has a very unique community. And after the 67 war, they came and they said to Israel, we want to be part of Israel, we want to be part of your country.
That's the village you can see from Tel Dan, correct?
Exactly.
Right.
They're Alawites, actually. They're the same ethnicity or same religion as Assad. And after Israel withdrew from Lebanon in 2000, and the UN came to mark the blue line between Israel and Lebanon, there was a problem because the blue line, the old blue line, came exactly in the middle of this village, because when in 67 it was a small village, and from there it grew specifically towards the north, towards Lebanon. And in 2000, the UN came and said, no, the border has to be cut off in half. Very smart on the UN side. And so Typical. They did. Yeah. And so they did. And up until the past few years, there was no fence there. So basically, you could have walked from Israel to Lebanon, no fence. It was a very big drug smuggling area, weapon smuggling, and even Hezbollah operation, until Israel said enough is enough, and they fenced the whole village into Israeli territory. And that's one of the main disputes of this region, because first of all, it's a very strategic region, controlling all of the northern parts of Israel. And second of all, you have to decide what you do with half of this village. There's a few thousand people that now you have to decide on what's going to happen with them, because obviously we're not going to bring them back to Lebanon. They're Israeli civilians, and Hezbollah insists on getting this part of the village, which is maybe less than half a mile long. So that's the Shebaa Farms, Shebaa Farm, Har Dov, depends on where you hear the name. And that's why it is so important to both Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah, I've been up there to Tel Dan a few times, and it kind of gives you a perspective, I think, on how close everything is, because you're standing there at Tel Dan and you can see the foxholes dug in the 67 war, because that was the border in 67. And I heard the story about the people from I'll call it Kishar. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. The village, which is probably a mile and a half or 2 miles up the hill that you could see. And they came down and said, hey, we're running out of food. Would somebody help us? We want to be part of Israel.
Yeah.
And I believe that's just been reopened again it had been reopened for tourist visits from Israel not too long ago, if I recall correctly.
But just to put things in perspective about Shebaa Farms, in case anyone wants to say, oh, just give it to them and count on them that they're not going to shoot at you, they look at the Hula Valley, the northern parts of Hula Valley, Gushrim, if you know, Bet Hillel, these kibbutzim, these communities, as part of the Shebaa Farms. They say that's the agricultural parts of this region. So for them, if you give them this region, why not the rest of it? So They already have the next excuse in line, much like the 7 villages that they claim ownership of within Israel.
So I'm going to wrap this up now. Is there any final thoughts that you want to leave with us? What if we want to be informed? What should we be looking at in the days, weeks, months ahead?
First of all, follow Alma on social media, wherever you want to, on our website. But I think we should look at the statements coming from Iran and Hezbollah. Although there's a lot of propaganda, usually when they say something, they mean it. If they say we're going to attack Israel, they're going to attack Israel. If they're saying revenge is coming, revenge is coming. And if they're saying we want to have a nuclear bomb so we can take over the Middle East, that's what they're doing. They're not lying. Sometimes they're leveraging it, but takes these statements seriously. But at the same time, it's important to remember it's a long-term war. Again, it's not going to end tomorrow, and it's not going to end in a year or two. So everyone here, including the international community, is going to need to have a lot of patience and to remember the full perspective of what's going on. It's not Israel versus Hamas. It's not Israel versus Hezbollah. It's Israel versus Iran, and to an extent, if you will, Russia, China, and that's the big story, basically.
Okay. Well, Boaz, I really appreciate it. My thanks to you and everybody, Zarit Sahavi and others at Alma. You're in our thoughts and prayers, and hopefully we can do this again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.